The history of Kalimari Desert starts on the game's release, with players competing for supremacy in the race to be the fastest person to complete the track. In 2000, a shortcut was found that players would spend over 2 decades optimizing, until recent discoveries turned everything on its head. This is the history of Kalimari Desert World Records. When it comes to Mario Kart 64, there are 2 categories you can compete in for records, shortcut and non-shortcut, with each of these having a 3-lap time and a fast lap time. Things break down further based on what version of the game you're playing on, with players typically preferring the PAL version as it runs at a slower frame rate, which makes driving a bit easier. To get things started, we'll be looking at the non-shortcut fast lap to get a good understanding of the basics, and the story begins in 2001. There's no video proof of records before Penev's 3943, but it has 2 major mechanics at play that we should look at: off-road driving and mini turbos. The lap opens by using the start boost to drive directly into the off-road section, since it's a shorter distance to the first rail crossing than driving on the track. Normally, this would cut your speed drastically, as the off-road sections impose a penalty, but when you're using the start boost or a mushroom, this penalty gets ignored. The remaining boosts are used in the off-road section after the second railroad crossing to cut more time off of the lap, but the other mechanic we need to understand is the mini turbo. A mini turbo, or MT, is a small speed boost you can receive by starting a drift and then counter-steering. When your smoke turns red, if you release the drift, you'll get a temporary increase in your top speed. These are used throughout the track to gain incremental advantages over the attempt, and are the main mechanic when it comes to non-shortcut times. The route that Penev used would be put to the test by MJ, a former champion with the longest reign in history, and one of his rivals, Troy Ullman. Minor optimizations on the race line would be the deciding factor in these records, with MJ setting the last record in their showdown with a 39:23. The time was approaching a sub-39, and MJ would be challenged by a young Matthias Roostermeyer on his rise to the top in 2011. Over the last 7 years, MJ had taken another .03 off of the record, and Matthias would tie this time in April. Things get interesting at this point, as they essentially play a game of tag, with MJ lowering the time and Matthias tying it, only for Matthias to take the record and then MJ put up the tie. Matthias would come out on top, as MJ retired shortly after he lost his champion title, but over the course of their feud, they pushed the time down to a 39:04. Through their rivalry, Matthias would introduce a small but significant change to the strategy after the second off-road section. Instead of doing 5 mini turbos after coming out of the boost, he found room for a 6th, as previously, it wasn't thought that enough space existed for an extra MT to be used. As the rivalry died down, so did the records on the track. Matthias would eventually try for the sub-39, but came up short by just 0.2 of a second. But in 2020, current champ Dan Burbank would take his rivalry with Matthias to Kalimari Desert. June 11th would be the day that Dan achieved his first world record on Kalimari Desert Fast Lap, following in the age-old tradition of tying the current record holder. But he wasn't finished, because later the same day, he got on another run. You can see how close he was cutting corners, as his previous 2 attempts bonked off the wall in the opening boost. But on his next run, he matches his ghost, and as he takes the second off-road section, he pulls slightly ahead. All he has to do is hit the last 6 mini turbos. Dan would set the first sub-39 time, and after a series of ties between him and Matthias, he would set the current record of 38:93. And that's the history of the non-shortcut fast lap. So let's look at the non-shortcut 3-lap. For the 3-lap, the oldest record we have video proof of comes from MJ in 2003. It starts off the same as the fast lap, except a shroom isn't used in the first off-road section. The reason the fast lap used the boost here is because the lap is so short, the time save is too large to ignore, but on the 3 lap, it's better applied to the later off-road section on lap 1. Lap 2, interestingly, doesn't use a shroom at all. Instead, it's saved for lap 3 so you can double boost through the long off-road section. As for the train, MJ drives behind it without any problem, and we'll get to why in just a bit. He locks in a time of 2:06 flat, just on the cusp of pushing it below a second barrier. And unfortunately, we don't have video of the run where he breaks the sub-6 threshold. It wouldn't be until mid-2004 that Troy would beat MJ's time using the same strategy. The reason they sandbagged 2 shrooms for lap 3 was to avoid the train, as it would be fully blocking the track if you shroomed on the second lap due to the increased pace. And in this run, Troy barely manages to squeeze by. MJ struck back with 3 records. The first 2 are lost, but the third has something that changed Kalimari Desert forever. On lap 2, he uses a shroom in the off-road portion, which meant he would be in direct conflict with the train, and instead of waiting or trying to drive around it, he cuts directly between 2 cars. This was known about previously, but it hadn't been used in time trials yet because the record wasn't low enough to warrant going for it until Troy's run, where there wasn't any room left to go around the back if you wanted to save time. Bottom line, the strat had to evolve if more time was going to be saved. This was easier said than done. The pace you approach the train determines where you'll need to be on the track to safely pass under it. And since you're coming out of a mini turbo right before arriving, there's not a lot of time for adjustments. But the record was approaching the 2:05 barrier, and if it was going to be broken, things would need to change. We'd need to wait 4 more years before a new record was set, and in 2012, the rising star of Matthias would tackle the 3 lap. And he had a new strat. Instead of boosting through the long off-road section on all 3 laps, Matthias would boost next to the start line on the first 2 laps and use the last shroom on the long section of lap 3, which let him beat MJ by 0.2 of a second. Now, you're probably thinking, how is this faster? And the reality is that it wasn't. But it did make the hill section a lot more consistent. You're required to jump over the hills for maximum speed, and the proper technique was hard to pull off, but by using a shroom, this eliminated the inconsistency, and Matthias just drove better on the rest of the track to make up the lost time. MJ would strike back using the first strat he developed so he could avoid the train and beat Matthias by 1/10 of a second. In one of his few non-shortcut records, VAJ would tie that time using a boost on the long section on each lap, which forced him to deal with the train, but he pulled it off and set a new record. It was at this time that Matthias added the extra MT on the final stretch of track, but he also modified MJ's first strat. He'd use 1 shroom at the start of lap 1, then sandbag the other 2 for lap 3's long off-road section. This let him avoid having to drive between the train cars and gave him plenty of boost to make up for the lost time by cutting more of the track on lap 3. MJ would adopt this tactic and take the record back from Matthias, to which Matthias replied by taking the record back with yet another new strat. Instead of sandbagging an extra shroom for lap 3, he used 1 shroom at the beginning of each lap. This didn't give him much room for error when it came to the train, and it locked him a time just 0.08 of a second away from breaking the 2:05 barrier. We don't have video of MJ's next record, which is unfortunate because he did break the threshold, but Matthias would ultimately get the record back as MJ prepared for retirement, beating him decisively with a 2:04.85. Things wouldn't stay quiet for long, however. Abney would test his abilities on the track in 2015 and settled on using VAJ's strat of 1 shroom per lap in the long section. This meant he would have to deal with the inconsistencies that came with hopping over the hills, but it didn't deter him and he got to work. If you did good on the hill hops, the strat saved a lot of time, so much that he set 3 records in November 2015. Matthias would take the record back, but yet again he used a different strategy, boosting by the start line on lap 1 and then boosting on the long section on laps 2 and 3. I should mention that when it came to strategies, it was hard to tell which was better during this era, as nobody was doing tool-assisted runs of non-shortcut tracks. So if 2 strategies were close in time save, it wasn't easy to tell which was faster, and the hills at the start are a bit special. but we'll get to that in a bit. Given that he had the world record, Matthias wasn't convinced that Abney Strat was the fastest one, and his run seemed to prove that, as he beat the time by another 0.2 of a second. It had taken 17 years for the record to break the 2:05 barrier, and already it was halfway to a 2:03. Abney stuck to his guns, however, and in mid-November, he would repeat his first record stint and set another 3, lowering the time to a 2:04.33. Matthias admitted defeat and realized that he'd have to hill hop manually, so he adopted Abney Strat, and the two went to war.
What?
Yes! Made the first train gap! I made the first train gap! For the first time ever.
After a long battle over 2 years, Matthias would emerge victorious on March 15, 2018, beating Abney's time by 13 hundredths of a second. Quite the decisive victory, and just 14 digits away from the coveted sub 2:04. But, just when he thought he could rest, Abney rose out of the ashes. His first lap was extremely well driven, beating Matthias by 0.18. All he had to do was keep this pace, and he'd set a new record. Lap 2, he drove the exact same time as Matthias. It all came down to the train on lap 3. And he passed through it just 0.04 ahead, which left the last shroom. Coming out of the shroom, he was slightly behind Matthias's lap 3. He needed the next mini turbos to count.
That sub. Oh man. Wasn't gonna miss a mini turbo that time.
A new record, and the world first sub 2:04. Matthias would get the record back a month later, and then something very interesting happened. We've only looked at the hill hops in brief detail, so let's have a closer look at that part of the track. It's a very technical section, as you need to jump at the apex of the hill to get as much height as possible for the best results, which frustrated runners, as these jumps aren't the easiest to pull off. However, in 2021, Weatherton and Forrest would upload a video where they had solved a decades-old mystery, and this shed some light on the Kalimari Desert Hills. Back in 2003, Troy Ullman would get what the community called a mystery boost on Luigi Raceway when he came close to a wall. It wasn't understood why this happened, but due to Dead Hamster telling Weatherton that he found something that probably wouldn't be useful when he was creating a custom track, Weatherton and Forrest solved the mystery of the mystery boost. If a tire becomes ungrounded, it goes into a state known as null tires, where it won't be affected by off-road terrain until it leaves the polygon it's currently on. In Troy's case, he was getting close enough to the wall that the tire clipped through and went out of bounds, so the game assigned it the null property. While in this state, it not only ignores the terrain it's on, but also stops creating particles and the off-road sound, so it's obvious when you get into the state. Runners just didn't understand why it was happening or what conditions triggered it, so it really is amazing that some tracks were optimized around a hidden mechanic. For Kalimari Desert, when players were jumping over the apex of the hills, they were actually achieving null tires because of how high they were jumping. And in hindsight, it makes sense why players were using boosts through this section, as it guaranteed null tires on each hill hop. With this new understanding, Matthias and Dan would take turns trading the record, with the current time sitting at a 2:03.75 by Dan. And despite all of the advancements, players still couldn't beat the train on lap 3. And that's the history of non-shortcut times on Kalimari Desert. It's clear that the train isn't going to be beaten in non-shortcut, but what about the category where almost anything goes? Early in 2000, it was discovered that you can drive inside of the train tracks at the second railroad crossing and use a shroom to jump the track and get back outside, cutting enough of the track to be faster than the non-shortcut method. The early records have no video proof, so we can't know the finer details, but we do have a record from 2004 set by Jeff Pobra, so let's have a look. It starts off identical to the non-shortcut fast lap. The first shroom is used on the hills at the very beginning to save time by cutting the corners. The two remaining shrooms are reserved for the track jump. When you get to the second rail crossing, you'll cut inside and use the first shroom to get across the off-road terrain before hitting the final shroom for the jump. Pobra's record left a lot of time on the table since he only used 2 mini turbos after making the track jump. And a year later, Carlo would beat his record using the same strat, but including 2 extra MTs after the jump. This stood for 7 years before VAJ would upload a video where he not only beat the record, but also spawned one of his many iconic memes related to the game.
Make that jump, come on!
VAJ wouldn't be the last person to make that jump. Through to 2017, current shortcut champion Abney would trade the record with Matthias, with the main improvement being cleaner driving. And before we get to the next fast lap record, I want to look at the history of the 3-lap. The earliest 3-lap strat we see comes from Penev, where he uses 3 shrooms on the first lap, 1 on the starting hills and 2 for the track jump. He then drives the rest of the course normally. This meant he had to go under the train, but it got him a time about a second faster than the non-shortcut record. In 2004, Pobra would alter the strategy slightly. He used a shroom on the starting hills like Penev did, but then sandbagged the remaining 2 for the track jump on lap 3. This was intentionally done to avoid the train, which plagued shortcut runners as well. In Jeff's record, he drove on the track for laps 2 and 3 instead of doing hill hops, which as we know from the non-shortcut 3-lap is slower. In 2005, Carlo would use the same strat as Pobra, but he did the hill hops on laps 2 and 3, which cut 0.3 of a second off the record and put it close to breaking the 2:05 barrier. 5 years later, VAJ would use the lap 1 shroom on the long section instead of the hills, meaning he had to do the hops manually on all 3 laps. This got him a time almost half a second faster than Carlo's, but it wouldn't be the only development in 2010. In December, VAJ would again alter the strat, using a shroom to perform a track skip on lap 1, drive lap 2 normally, then use both shrooms in the lead up to the track jump on lap 3, which saved 0.2 of a second on the old method and let you slip by the back of the train. Up to this point, shortcut 3-laps didn't have to worry about the train and could go behind it since they backloaded boosts for the jump on lap 3. But there's a lost record by VAJ that's worth looking at, because it used a very different strategy. This is a time driven by Zoran, and it's notable for one big reason. It's the first known strategy where the train was beaten. It uses 2 shrooms on the first lap to make the first track jump, and then a single shroom on lap 2 to jump the track again. At this point, you're so far ahead that the train isn't even an issue, as Zoran was able to drive comfortably in front of it. This was likely the strat that VAJ used in his lost record, since if we look at the forums, we see a very intriguing post. Zoran and VAJ had theorized that doing 1 track jump per lap was likely the optimal strat. It's just that players really didn't like dealing with the train. And VAJ replies to this post confirming his time, so it's highly likely he used the front-loaded strat to set it. That's where the record would stand for 3 years. Since no one wanted to drive under the train, they either front-loaded the shrooms to beat it outright, or back-loaded so they could go around it. When Abney came onto the scene, he set his sights on the KD shortcut records, and he decided to do what everyone knew was faster, but didn't want to commit to: perform the track jump on each lap, and deal with the train. This strat was fast. In fact, Abney theorized he could beat the train entirely if his first 2 laps were driven well enough, and that's what he set out to do. In 2014, he got on a run that was the fastest pace ever going into lap 3.
Can you make it through that gap? I don't even know. I had no idea what to do.
Not the outcome he was hoping for, but he wouldn't be deterred. and a year later, he would set 2 records. The first had him arrive just in time to squeeze between the first 2 passenger cars, with his second record having a slightly worse line, so he took the gap further to the right. He didn't give up and believed it was possible to beat the train, and his next run had him half a second ahead as he entered lap 3. Knowing he was on world record pace, he opted to play it safe and drive the track instead of risking it on the hill hops, which cost him beating the train, but he did grab the record and managed to push it below the 2:03 second barrier. 2017 would be an interesting year because he'd get on a run that had first and second laps even faster than his previous fastest pace. He beat the train. All he had to do was finish the attempt, and the first record with the train being beat was his.
Oh my god.
A rare glitch dashed his hopes once again. He would lower the record later that year, and it had another fast start, with an opening lap a full half second ahead of his last record. This was shaping up to be the run, but disaster struck on the jump for lap 2. The same glitch happened again, except this time he landed between the tracks and then bounced over with enough force to put him on the other side of the track. He still managed to get the world record, but the lap 2 mishap would cost him the attempt at beating the train, until he came back in 2020. He had a run start off 0.2 of a second slower than his last record, and his second lap was slower by just over a frame. Not a good start if you want to beat the train. But if you look at his previous run, he didn't drive off-road on lap 3 in the lead up to the train. This time, he had to take the faster route if he wanted a record, so he took to the left. He made it past. All he needed was to hit the jump.
This is definitely world record. Oh, my thumb slipped off after the last short.
A new record, breaking the 2:02 barrier and the first where the train was beaten. A 23-year quest was finally completed. If we go further into 2020, a player named Soft Syrup discovered that the location players were using the boost wasn't optimal. In previous attempts, they were jumping over the hill before the track and then using the shroom. But this didn't guarantee they would get enough air to trigger null tires. Soft Syrup decided to shroom before the hill. This ensured that you received null tires and saved enough time to push the record lower. It's worth mentioning here that Weatherton hadn't dropped the video explaining null tires yet, so all of the experimenting with shrooms on this track was done without that knowledge. The players just knew that it was faster through trial and error. With this strat, Abney got to work on the fast lap time, which he improved by 1/10 of a second after barely getting over the fence, making him the last person to make that jump, because everything was about to change. A tasser by the name of Forest64 investigated the fence that borders the train track, and he found that under very precise conditions, it's possible to clip through the fence from the inside. It has to do with how collision works with the fence. The hitbox it has is the length of 4 characters like most other walls, and if you want to avoid it entirely, you would need to be going fast enough that on one frame you're just in front of it, and on the next frame you're entirely past its hitbox. Under normal conditions, you can't get enough speed for this to happen, even with the help of a star. But the fence is unique from other walls. Its hitbox extends in both directions, with 1/4 of it being on the outside of the fence and the rest being on the inside. And the force it applies when you run into it is different based on what side you approach from. If you run into it from the outside, it only applies force with the small section, and runners have known for a while that you can use a shroom to clip through it when going from outside to in. The problem is clipping from inside to out, as the full length of the hitbox becomes active. Forrest found one exception to this while experimenting with a TAS. If you boost on the inside of the fence and land exactly in the middle of the fence, you'll pass through the hitbox unhindered. But the position to do this was incredibly precise, with runners estimating the odds of hitting it to be about 1 in 90,000. This didn't stop them from trying, however, and VAJ's famous line changed from "make that jump" to "clip that fence." This is where things get interesting. Given that the chances of hitting the clip were so low, how many attempts do you think it took before someone got it? Days? Weeks? A month? How about on the 45th attempt?
4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, no!
Building up muscle memory from constantly resetting, when MrPittjr surprisingly hit the clip, he reset the attempt on instinct. So while he was the first person to hit the clip, he wouldn't get what was almost guaranteed to be a world record, as the skip saves about 10 seconds. It was around this time that Abney was closing in on holding both records on every shortcut, and to stop him from achieving shortcut dominance, the community organized an event where everyone would stream attempts to clip that fence. If someone else could get this record, it would dash Abney's plans for shortcut domination, and for 3 days, players spent their time driving into the fence, hoping to be the first person to clip through and set a world record. Saturday would pass, and no one had managed to hit an attempt, with Sunday being the same. The odds weren't in the community's favor, and luck didn't seem to be on their side either, but there was one player that continued playing. Over the weekend, Dossey had accumulated over 3,000 attempts of his own, and he fired up stream on Monday to continue the grind. He refused to give up, and drove attempt after attempt into the fence. Was it going to happen? It didn't look likely.
Oh my god, I got it. I got it. Wait.
Dossey hit the clip and beat the train on lap 3 by a country mile, setting records in both the 3-lap and fast lap. His driving was okay, but he used the shrooms to optimize attempts per hour and not for the lap, so it was possible to beat him if you sacrificed attempt efficiency for lap optimization. So how long do you think it would take before someone clipped that fence and beat his record? Dossey would actually be the only person to ever set a record with the fence clip, because 6 months later, a new skip would be found. So far, the goal has been to beat the train, with Abney achieving the first record where a player managed to beat it to the crossing on lap 3. And with Dossey's record, there wasn't any concern given to the train due to how much time the fence clip saved. So if the train had been beaten, what was the next logical step? Instead of worrying about clipping the fence or even crossing the tracks, a skip was found where players didn't have to leave the start line. Posted on July 26, 2021, Forrest found a skip that had you crash into the wall and soar over the top of its hit detection into the out-of-bounds section. If you cross over a certain point while out of bounds and then cross backwards over the finish line, the game thinks you've driven the entire way around the track. This means that once you cross the finish line, you'll be credited for a lap, and coincidentally, Lakitu set you down right behind the line. Forrest initially called the skip the KD Bounce, but someone decided to call it a Desert Tenko due to its similarity to the Weather Tenko on Choco Mountain, and the name stuck. Sorry for that one, Forrest. There was a problem, however. Forrest said that this shortcut wasn't possible in real time, as the height you needed to get was too great and required a precise setup. But this didn't stop people from trying, with MrPittjr streaming a bunch of near hits, having him declare that this must be possible.
Look at that, that's even closer. Tell me that isn't...
This gave the community hope, with Forrest even saying that one of MrPittjr's attempts may have been high enough, and that's about as far as it got for the time being, because other skips had been found that took runners away from Kalimari Desert. At the end of September, Robert Mckinnon would return to Kalimari Desert, with VAJ's old phrase of "make that jump" becoming relevant once again. And early in the morning of October 1st, while in a call with Forrest and a few others, the unthinkable would happen. Robert made that jump.
Oh, I made it over.
Wait, it might have actually worked.
Holy, come on. I think
Don't
so.
spin
I think
out,
it
don't
looks
spin out.
Yes, let's go. Dossey is dead. Dossey is dead. Holy.
Serious?
I just got it. Desert Tanko.
That's clear.
He broke Dossey's fast lap and 3-lap records by 10 seconds in the same run, which had become a theme on this course over the years. And in fact, he would set 3 more fast lap records that very night. This ignited a war among karters, with almost 24 records being set between October 1st and 2nd. Times were pushed incredibly low in a very short amount of time, and one thing became obvious. A single Desert Tenko wasn't going to cut it for the 3-lap or fast lap. For the fast lap, it was faster to do the attempt on the second lap if you hit a Desert Tenko on the first lap and then immediately set up for a second instead of driving across the finish line. This is because the game thinks you're ready for the next lap after the first skip, so during the second, you'll cross the finish line and complete lap 1 before the magic of the second skip has taken place. So when you're set down, all you need to do is drive ahead and the second lap will be counted. Surprisingly, the first person to hit this wasn't even trying for it. Robert had a bad first attempt that wasn't fast enough for the record, so he set up a second right away. And to his surprise, not only did the attempt work, but he became the new record holder and first person to hit 2 consecutive Desert Tenkos. This would become the dominant strat for the fast lap, with the last shroom being used to cross the finish line once you were set down. Martin K has the current record, but there's one by VAJ we need to look at, because I think it's the greatest reaction he's ever had to a world record.
Woo! VAJ, come on! Yeah! Woo! Come on! Let's do it! World record!
This leaves the 3-lap. Robert's double Desert Tenko got him the 3-lap in addition to the fast lap record, so by default, players now had to hit 2 if they wanted a 3-lap record. Martin would grind a few double hits on October 1st, but he knew eventually that a 3 out of 3 would be necessary, so rather than grind out more 2 hits, he started grinding for 3 hits. It didn't take long, because just a day later, he became the first person to hit 3 consecutive Desert Tenkos, which pushed the time below a minute for the first time in the track's history. Now that the bar was set, the challenge became setting up the attempts as fast as possible, as there wasn't time to spare adjusting for the proper position. Players now had to go by instinct instead of intricate setup, and it sparked a war between Abney and Martin.
I think that should probably do it.
'46.
Nice.
World record! Yeah! I got it! Woo! Woo! We did it! We did it, guys! This is what I'm talking about, muchacho! You know it!
Once again, VAJ snuck in to claim the world record, cutting Abney by 17 hundredths of a second. The record didn't have much time left to be squeezed out of it, and on February 4th, Abney would wring it all but dry with this run. He was blistering fast on each setup, And when the dust settled, he was almost a full second ahead of VAJ, and that's where the record stands today. There is a faster setup that the TAS uses, but nobody has went for it yet. I won't say that it's impossible, because if anything, the accomplishments shown in this video prove that you should never say something is impossible when it comes to Mario Kart. Thanks for watching.